I'm back in the really big class. It is a Thursday in September 24th, as far as we know. And evening in London. Chris Costanza is with us from San Francisco Bay Area, from
Right?
Palo Alto. It's
On
morning for
Stanford
him.
campus. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He's on the Stanford campus today,
At
and
the
we
moment,
have
yeah.
such an exciting thing that is about to happen because we are going to hear two string quartets play on Zoom. And this is something that I started thinking about immediately when the classes got up and running back in April. I thought, well, if we can do this with violinists, surely we should be able to do this with string quartets if string quartets can be in the room together.
Right.
And all summer, I kept waiting for the news to turn such that it would seem like maybe there would be places in the world that people could rehearse together again. And as soon as I heard of some people actually doing that, I thought, okay, it's time. It's time to come back to the big class and get it going with string quartets. So our groups today are from South Africa and London. The group in South Africa formed basically in lockdown. Maybe they can tell us a little bit about that. But they filled their time playing string quartets together. And the other group is at the Royal Academy, and they formed about a year and a half ago, I believe, and they spent time this summer in an isolation bubble rehearsing together and
Wow.
getting back into playing shape together. So it's
Fabulous.
just amazing to me that this is happening. Chris is the cellist of the St. Lawrence Quartet, someone I have known for as long as I've been a musician. I think I can't even
Some
remember when
time
I
now.
first met you. Um, and I'm just so excited that I'm not going to talk anymore. We're going to share this video and start out with some Mendelssohn. This is Mendelssohn's Opus 13 quartet, the first movement. It has a slow introduction and an allegro following. The introduction is based on a song. It's called Es ist wahr, and is it true? It's a question all about is it true? Is it true? I posted today on the Facebook group a beautiful rendition of it by Barbara Bonney, if you're interested. And this is it. So our quartet members are Jeffrey, Joshua, Stéphanie, and Micola. And they've sent us a video, and then we will switch back to the Zoom after that. So enjoy their beautiful performance of the first movement of Mendelssohn.
Right. I am unmuted now. Fabulous. Whoa. Great playing. Really great. Now, can I see it? Now, what I'm going to do is let's make sure that you guys are featured here. Okay. I want to make sure I see you. How are you all? What time is it where you are?
8 at night.
Oh, okay. Oh,
Yeah.
not in the evening, I assume.
Yeah.
Okay. 8 in the morning is not my favorite time. So I'm not a morning person. And where exactly are you? What city are you in?
We're in Cape Town. Yeah.
You're in Cape Town. Okay, cool. I was wondering if that's where you would be. Fantastic. Now I want to just get to where I can see you guys better. Perfect. Great. So, and again, Cecily gave a little bit of a preview. But again, tell me, you've been together for how long now?
So we've basically we've played with each other on and off. I study overseas, but I come back every now and then, and we play together then. So it's sort of been a bit of that. And then recently, when we were allowed to play again with each other during lockdown, we sort of, I don't know, about 2 months ago now, we started playing together, and yeah.
So 2 months. That's fantastic. I mean, that's very impressive work. And how did you arrive at choosing, the decision to choose this particular piece? I mean, there are obvious reasons to play it, but I'm just curious what you all thought about it.
We generally we tend to choose things. We tend to choose things we want to play, not necessarily to sort of, I guess, form ourselves as a quartet. But we try to play pieces that we enjoy playing. So I think Josh and Steph really wanted to play the Mendelssohn A minor. We played the F minor 2 years ago for a few.
Oh, you did.
And so yeah, we've been looking.
Great. Yeah, that F minor is quite a piece. I mean, this this work is well. First of all, are you? I assume you're familiar with the song on which at least the introduction is based.
Yes. Well, we know as much as that's.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's a song from it's his Opus 9 as it's printed in the lovely score here. But I've listened to it too. Years ago, when I first learned the piece, I was aware of the song, but I hadn't heard it. I mean, I spend so much of my time playing the cello, thinking about singing and vocalizing. And so, when a piece is so directly based on a piece of vocal music. In other words, when an instrumental piece is based on the vocal music, I think it's always wonderful to go back and hear the singing component. And I like to sing a lot. I sing a lot when I teach and practice, and when I'm in rehearsal with my quartet to their great dismay, I'm sure. But it's still just such an integral part of coming to terms with music. And there are a few things about that. One is sort of basic tone production, but of course breathing is a big part of that as well. And it occurred to me, I was thinking about this piece, not just today or yesterday, but recently, that we have this beautiful sort of expansive introduction filled with questioning and these sort of moments for repose, these little short breaks where we sort of reflect. And then once the body of the movement gets started, once we hit Allegro vivace, I mean, it just goes, right? I mean, there's two places maybe where he writes a ritardando or something, and it slows down a little bit. But we don't have the advantage of, for example, well, it's interesting. You mentioned, I think you mentioned F minor, right? The Opus 80 quartet. Not to get distracted by that, but thinking of the first movement of that, you have that beautiful second theme, da, 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 with that descending line. That is in direct contrast to the beginning, and yet at the same time he writes syncopations in the cello part during that second theme. And he has this way of, even in this, well, back to this piece now, moments when you feel like there might be some calm and repose, there's usually something sort of brewing underneath. It's hard to feel like you could just completely take a deep breath and relax and find your calm space. And I think one of the challenges in playing this movement is to take advantage of those moments. And perhaps rhythmically it's hard to do that. I think tonally it is where we have to go a lot of the time, to find those super quiet, intimate places and really make the most of them. Even with your super high quality video, I'm not in the room with you, so I can't, I might not be getting the full effect of your extremes of sound and dynamics. So not necessarily just loud and soft, but coloristic variety as well. So when you do have the places that are really held, as if we can barely get the words out, as if we can barely get the sounds out if we were producing them with our voices, I think there are opportunities to go farther with that. Another thing about, speaking of Mendelssohn and dynamics, sometimes his dynamics are just downright strange, because he'll write fortissimo, then he'll write another fortissimo, he'll write different dynamics for different players that don't necessarily always make sense, and so we have to constantly try to come to terms with that aspect of what's in the score. So that's a topic. I think another topic that it would be fun to explore is sometimes rhythmic freedom. I think there are places where the drive of the music makes us want to kind of sweep forward. I think sometimes you guys are resisting that a little bit, and you don't need to resist it quite as much. I think there are times when you can not necessarily rush, but feel a little bit more like you're being pulled by the energy of the music, and we'll find some places like that. I think just going to, as a cellist, I'm obviously not only drawn to the cello part, but there are considerations with bass line and how bass line carries us through. For example, I'll give you one really quick one that comes to mind. Do you have the measure numbers in your parts? Yeah. So measure 47. Da, 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 da. I mean, there's like it's not the loudest place. It's not even the most intense place. In fact, you've just had a moment of greater intensity. However, there's something about that sort of stewing, brewing, kind of repetitive bass line, and then when he goes up half a step to the A sharp and then to C sharp, even more so. I think there's this going on, and I don't think it means you have to play. Like I say, it's not the loudest, so it's not about being louder, but I think there's an intensity to it that kind of sets the tone for there's a lot that can come from the bottom working its way up to the top. So that's another topic. It also occurred to me that one could easily spend hours on just the adagio, as you probably have in rehearsal. I always think of the opening of the Beethoven Harp Quartet when I think of this opening, and I'm sure you guys have too. And in fact, Mendelssohn, in some of his writing, you hear this connection to Beethoven. In fact, this piece, it has often been said, has sort of, at least in his mind, connections to late Beethoven quartets. I'm not a historian, so I won't say too much about that because I'll probably be wrong. But I think there is definitely, if you look at, for example, Opus 132, which is also in A minor, and there are perhaps parallels with what he's doing here and what he heard in Beethoven's quartets. He was all of about 18 when he wrote this, so that's a pretty big deal for an 18-year-old. So one could spend quite a lot of time on the opening, but just in a nutshell, what I think I miss the most in the introduction is the opportunity to make something more interesting of the rests. So, and that would be in particular the bar 2 and bar 4. There are a couple of others, or really only one other, where no one else is playing. But those first two sort of GP rest moments are a big deal to me. Can you start and why is that? Because, well, play it once and let's just have a discussion about that opening. So why don't you play the first 4 measures, and you can stop at the second rest. Actually, sorry, and then go on to as far as the pianissimo, which is measure 7. Great. That magical moment. There's your first incredible opportunity to do something with color, right? Because not just because he writes pianissimo, but because of the F sharp major chord. Suddenly, what? Where did that come from? It's not expected. There's a moment of wonder or wonderment, or whatever word we want to use. Okay, so there's that. So to me, and I know, I get a better sense of it from your video because of, internet connections and such, but I can still feel it. In fact, why not pick up a cello here, and I can just quickly, this poor cello has been resting for a while because I've been using my other one, but hopefully it's still functional. Give me 1 second. Be right with you. So it's really just this, you don't necessarily have to see my whole setup here, but if we talk about the rest, and then what happens here? So I feel that, and it may be because we play in an ensemble and we want to be together, and we try to communicate pulse, and we try to unify that sense of communicated pulse. On that quarter rest, maybe there's, and I can't get inside your head, so you can answer, but maybe there's a little bit, you're thinking, well, we have to be together on the next note, and maybe the emotional impact or the musical effect of that rest is being compromised because of it. So when I do it by myself, I'm not worried about anybody else playing with me. So obviously, I'm thinking it, but obviously there's nobody else in the room here, I don't think. So it's really just up to me to think about that. So if I play, so to me that rest is, there's air still going through the rest. And it's not necessarily something that it's not a stop. It's just a moment of no pitches being played. But there's still this sense of the line continuing, right? So, 2, 3, 1, maybe even if you breathe, and then here, I mean, imagine so old school players. Where, I'm sure you've listened to, especially with YouTube available to us, you can listen to all sorts of old recordings of things, and the old, Fritz Kreisler and these quartets that existed in the past. And I don't admit to having listened to a quartet from the very distant past play this piece, but where you get a sense that the rhythm is not quite so strict, and yet the pulse, let's put it this way, that it's not metronomic. The pulse is clear, the pulse is omnipresent, but we're not stuck, right? We still have this sense of flow. So if you imagine, if we could be totally free, and I want you to try this, if we could think, and 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, and 3, and 1, 2. And that one's more of a breath, I think. You could probably, if you were singing, you might not even need to breathe in bar 2. You'd probably have to breathe in bar 4. Can you actually do that, what I just did, in your own way, without your instruments once? So what I want you to do is, you can gesture physically as you wish. I like to move my arms a lot because I'm Italian, but the sense that you can feel this gesture together, breathe together, and then count the beats out loud together without playing the notes on your instruments. Great. No, I know the mics pick up your instruments better than your voices. I feel like you're a little bit more confident when you're using your instruments, but that's okay. But the point is, I think there's something to be said when trying to connect, especially in slow music that is in rhythmic unison. Developing a unified sense of gesture that is not necessarily completely connected to playing your instruments. Right? I'm sure you've done this sort of thing before. I mean, this is just the idea that music is music. We happen to be playing it on our instruments, and that does in fact tie into the idea of the voice that I was talking about earlier. So, can you do that actually one more time and do even more of it? and do it a little bit louder. Maybe the mic will pick you up a little better. I can hear you better. And that's not entirely your fault, but just a little bit louder. And I want you to all be equally involved, because that opens up the topic of cueing, and how groups ideally when starting a piece or when playing something together, the individuals in the group will kind of do the cue at the same time in the same way, even though somebody has to initiate it. So just, do it where everybody is. You all feel like you're equally involved. Everybody's leading, nobody's following. Yeah, good. Excellent. Now, let's play it. Play it one more time, obviously with your instruments now. And what I would love for you to do, I think there's another thing I would say about this, and I always come back to this when I'm hearing and playing this piece. I think it's a little dangerous if it, I don't know, what does adagio mean? We know what the word means, but what does it mean for tempo? I mean, I happen to like a tempo that isn't restrictively slow at the beginning, or at least has some flexibility. So what I'm suggesting is that the effect of the swell on the first half note, and anybody, I'm going to do this. This is fun. Anybody in YouTube land who wants to see, there's a little swell on the half note, you see, and we see that, and it's probably not so much about dynamics, but it's more about gesture, and that's another topic altogether. Do swells necessarily mean loud and soft? Sometimes not. But I think this one obviously has some dynamic impact. But it's more, I think, there's a weightiness to it. And maybe it has impact on the time. So in fact, maybe that first half note is a little bit expansive, and then 3-1 comes back, and then the rest is part of the 3-1, and then the crescendo almost implies a little bit of motion. Can you just try that, see if it stays together, and see if you can feel that? Yeah. Keep going. Good. Keep going. Move. Great, cool. Before we go on, good. Oh, I liked it better. Was it a little bit more moving than before? Slightly bit, a slight bit. Yeah, I think it had a little more sense of direction. That's the word I would use. And I liked a lot of things about that. I love those first 4 bars that you had a little bit more flexibility in them. I started to feel that the rest had a little bit more connection to what came before and what comes afterward in terms of its function. And I think always, let's put it this way, always pay extra attention to rests, group rests, I mean, that they are serving their purpose in the best and most beautiful and most effective way. But I thought there were a lot of things that were better about that. There's a little temptation, I think, because of the diminuendo, now a couple of specifics, because of the diminuendo in measure 9, that is, to come away too much. I think measure 10 and 11 are still substantive. So just be careful that it's not completely transparent there. I think there are 2 moments of more sort of extremely intimate sound in the introduction. There are two exactly. One is measure 6. Obviously, we talked about that to set up that beautiful harmony. And then you emerge from that. And I think 10 then should still be substantive. And then the other one is measure 17, 2 bars before the allegro, right? So that one, what I want to do is start, also, by the way, I thought what was more effective this time was measure 13, because that rest, which serves a different purpose than the rest in measure 2, right? Because you've just reached da da da, yeah, that's this one, this kind of rest. The one in measure 2 is more this. So I mean, I'll just choreograph it and I'll dance it, and then you sort of see it's all about. Well, there's the physicality of what we do, right? And whether or not we show it in our playing. I mean, like if you've ever seen my quartet, we're sort of physical, or some of us are, and one in particular is more physical than the others. But I'm not going to name names. But in any case, there's a and then there are plenty of groups that aren't so much that way. I don't know if you've ever seen the old Vermeer quartet, which no longer exists. And the problem is I was talking to the violists recently, almost no videos of them. But Shmuel Ashkenazi, the first violinist, maniac, one of the greatest violinists in history. But he just a little bit Heifetz-like in terms of motion, right? But communicated incredibly well. So it doesn't mean that we have to do lots of physical things to be communicative. But I do think. Well, let me put it this way. I tell my students this. I walk around Stanford campus and sing the music that you're working on and move according to the singing that you're doing. And they'll all think you're totally batty, but it's worth it. But I think there's something to be said for the idea of allowing ourselves to physically engage with what the music is saying to us, whether or not we do that when we play. So, I mean, maybe it's when we put the instruments down, or maybe it's like what we did with our experiment at the beginning, where I had you all sort of conduct together or breathe together and count together. Those are all interesting techniques, I think. So, again, to cover more material and not get stuck on although so far I have, on the introduction only, let's go ahead. That bar 16 I always find really interesting. Can you play bar 16, which is 3 before the double bar, very slowly once, because I want to hear all the details of what's going on in that bar. Just right on that bar, like maybe 1 and 2 and about that tempo. Right. So interestingly, I mean, I don't know. Do you feel that the pianissimo, and I think this is sometimes a question. I'll just ask you the question: is the pianissimo completely subito, or do you sort of preview it from the previous note? In other words, da 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 dum, or da dum, or something else. I guess the question is, so you're all playing E's 1/8 note, one note before the downbeat on the pianissimo, right? You're all playing the same pitch there. So you're already playing the same pitch. Then he turns it into a pianissimo, entire bar, dotted half note, where we have no idea what's happening because all motion stops and you have this sort of washout, I would call it, right? What if you really like even more expressive and then this very pure kind of like anything can happen now. No, try one more time. Yeah, good. So I think something like, I mean, I don't know about how much space you need, but maybe a teeny bit of placement. I mean, not a big Beethovenian subito or anything, but something that just has a little bit of placement. Also, the harmony. Can you just play the first note you have in measure 16 and just hold it? And now play. Now second violin and cello, move to your second note only, and everybody else hold the first note. Now go back and forth. So first violin and viola, hold your note. Second violin and cello go back and forth between your notes. Great. Now hold the second note and then go to change to the B in the first violin part. So in other words, play as written, but stop once the B comes. Right. So the point is, I mean, I could just tell you, or we could. The consonants basically really only comes when the B natural comes in the first violin part. So, and then play the second beat of the measure. Everybody, just whatever you have. And then change to G sharp. Right. So then again, that's kind of an appoggiatura or a suspension, right? So there are these little. The point is, there are these moments of dissonance. And then the falling fifth is expressive. Plus, what's also interesting is the fact that he put the dotted rhythm against the eighth notes, right? Because earlier, you either all have eighth notes together, and I think I'm right about this, or you have dotted rhythm together. But this time, he stacks them up. So I think that's what these are the reasons that measure is particularly interesting to me. There's sort of a harmonic kind of sense coming out of the fermata from the viola part, the E natural, and then the sense of tension and release, and then we end up with this sort of devastatingly, I don't know, uncertain and unsure and unclear harmony, which is no harmony, which is the E. It's just boom, we're left with the E, which just so happens is the dominant pitch in the key of A major or A minor. So anyhow, the point is there's a lot of stuff going on in that measure, and we'll just leave it alone for now. But I just want. Can you? Sorry, I have my list of. I should remember names better than this. Jeffrey, are you Jeffrey or Jeff?
Jeffrey.
Jeffrey's great, perfect. So Jeffrey, can you play that measure by yourself once, measure 16? Right. It could be, and then imagine possibilities. Da, 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 dum, dum. Could go to, A major suddenly or something like that instead of not. Now, can the three of you play your parts in that measure without Jeffrey once? Right. So kind of the most tension is the beginning of the measure, right? The first note. And then it sounds like it's just going to kind of resolve, and then the lack of resolution is what makes that interesting. And I think the first violin part is actually quite expressive because of the dotted rhythm and this harmonic thing we're talking about. Okay, so can you start there now in real tempo, and let's go on into the body of the movement. And a couple of things. And it could just be what, even in the video, I wasn't quite sure because we haven't done it since. But have the viola part. Do you call yourself Stéphanie or Steph, or what do you call yourself?
Stephanie's fine.
Stéphanie's fine. Good. We're gonna go with. Do you have an accent on the E?
Yeah, it's just the spelling.
It doesn't have any impact on the pronunciation. It's not French or something like that. Okay. Cool. So Stéphanie. And I think the tempo conversion was great. I mean, not everybody gets this, but it's basically 30-second. The notes equal the same. More or less, it's the same, right? But maybe the crescendo, and I think it may be meaningful that he put crescendo in the viola part and just little hairpins in the other parts. So even though everybody has forte on the downbeat, and I think I want to hear a little bit more emergence of viola there. And I think when you have these big quarter note, for example, downbeat, and I'm thinking to myself, as I say quarter note, you probably use the English terminology for note values, right? Which here in America, we're pretty stunted that way. We don't learn solfege. We don't learn we just learn quarter note. No, I'm sorry about that, but you know what I'm talking about, right? I should study this sort of stuff so that I can be more international. But I'm not going to get started on the problems with America, but that's the least of our problems. But anyhow, in any case, when you have these, I'll use my terminology, quarter note downbeats like that one, and there are a couple of others where you have these chords and he writes no articulation on the note. I think on the longer side is better, but maybe not fully sustained. So it's a rich full chord. Okay, can we start in measure 16 and just keep going now and let the viola emerge even more? And then when the piano comes, you'll stay quiet as long as you can before you emerge from that with a crescendo. Cool. So great. I have a couple of thoughts. I wonder, I've thought about this before, and I'm going to rethink it. But so if you think, let's be really. I'm going to be really dry about it for a moment in terms of tempo conversion. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. So so that would make the allegro, at least as I'm hearing it, a little faster. But on the other hand, it doesn't need to be exactly, because you've had these fermatas at the end of the adagio. You can start the woody a little slower, I think, if you want, woody, and then let it move a little bit into the tempo. And I guess where I'm going with it is I feel the allegro could be a little bit. I think in your video it was a little, in your performance it was a little quicker. Right now it feels a little bit slow. Can we just literally do now? Just we've gained a bar. Let's do measure 17. Let's do from the pianissimo, and then maybe Stéphanie, you can start. I don't want to say a lot slower, but just enough so it doesn't sound like you're vaulting ahead immediately. Great. That's great. I have a thought. That's the right idea, I think. Just you can experiment a little bit with the motion through those notes into the downbeat. I think sometimes, I don't know if I can play this. This sounds a little. Is it? I mean, I don't think it's necessarily in 2. I think maybe the pulse is a 4 pulse, but I think it gets a little. Sometimes it gets a little bit like this, and and then we can. Then he gives you the sforzandi and before the fortissimo. So maybe it needs those gestures at the beginning. What can be more like. Almost think like one beat per measure, like and then you have the subdivisions which keep you together. But and then maybe in the third measure, there we go a little bit more into 4, and then we really go into 4 measure 22 because that's where he writes sforzando. So in other words, there's a sense of it transforming a little bit, and then when we write. A little bit of anguish, perhaps. I mean, what does he write? Mezzo forte espressivo. It's mezzo dynamics drive me crazy because they always seem to me slightly non-committal. But we'll roll with it because I think it's probably because he had you arrive at fortissimo. And then he wanted it less, but if he wrote piano, it would get swallowed up, and he wants piano later, so it has to be mezzo forte. Okay, so but the point is, what mezzo forte means dynamically, I think there's a. I almost would say, can you do it once where you like, maybe we need to do it under tempo once, where it's sort of then. And then finally, Jeffrey, when you come in, there's okay, this is where we were going, right? But you had to have these moments of everybody has to speak their mind first, and finally, there's the sense of unity when the first violin comes in. Can you actually do that sequence once, upbeat to measure 24, and pretty slowly once, and then and then and so that when the cello F comes in, it's a little more pathetic even than the second violin F, whatever that means to you. Just try it once, about that tempo, just that sequence. Yeah, good. So, I mean, I think there are two things to consider about this rhythm. One is that what I said earlier. Oh, something just fell over on the side of my room there. Maybe there's a mouse. Okay. Anyway, the rhythm dum para yum para, it as a rhythm can be yum para. It could also be dum para. It's probably not dum ta dum because that's more like a triplet. We probably wouldn't go that far with it, but I think the other two versions have their say and their moments in this movement. So yum para. So I think it's rhythmic. It needs to be rhythmically accurate, but I think the espressivo element of it is yum para padum. That the 16th note, that the quick note. I don't know if my bow will show you. My computer's falling, but I won't let that happen. I'm saving it. All I meant to do is turn that so you can see my bow. There we go. Success. Okay. And the way I search for that sort of thing is to actually do it slowly like we just did. So because we don't want it to be kind of a motoric thing. We want it to be, in fact, we've just had a motoric idea. It's like something, a motor running kind of, or some kind of ongoing directional thing. And now yum para yum param is more vocal first of all, and I think yum. Can you do it actually that slowly once? Yum para 1 2 3 4 where you really give a lot of attention to the little note. Yum padam, maybe even more attention to the little note than the long note. But really slowly once. Good. And try it again. Good. Try a little faster than that, a little bit, and make sure you're really together, no matter what. You still have to be an ensemble. Good. So whatever that means to you, I mean, I'm just going to leave you with, some of these sorts of things that, maybe don't, doing it this way doesn't feel quite the same as when you play fast. But it's interesting, we know from playing our instruments for many years, you work on something slowly, you sculpt an idea, you sculpt a note, you come up with a few thoughts about how to approach a note in a slow tempo, and then when we speed it up, it feels different, but I think it's affected by the experience of having spent the time doing it slowly. So I just want you to find the most expressive way of doing that gesture, playing that gesture, when you play it fast too. So since Cecily just mentioned we probably 5-6 minutes, we need to wrap it up. So let's cover a little more ground here. Can we start right there, back in tempo, and whatever that exercise just left you with, it will have left you with. But I want you to just, as you work on the piece, just think about that rhythm, and it happens 80 million times, maybe not 80 million, maybe only 40 million, but it happens many times in the course of the movement. And what does it mean each time it comes? And like, for example, in 34, when he puts the cello in and viola together in octaves, and then second violin all alone, then cello and viola. Why does he do that? And then puts the first violin alone again as before. He's transforming it somewhat, but I think there's meaning to all of that. And this is the first time we say this thing. So just you can start right there, only in real tempo now. Pick up to 24. Good. Great. This is good. I want to hit one or two more points, skipping around a little bit before we run out of time. So 34 is an interesting place because suddenly it's doubled in octaves, as I mentioned, and also mezzo forte again. But I think it's easy for that to become a little too angry sounding, and I think it's more a little more desperate than angry, perhaps. It just happens to be in octaves now, and therefore has more intensity to it. So in other words, connect it maybe in terms of how you approach it physically and even emotionally to the first time. It's just a little stronger than the first one because it's in octaves. So that's good. And be careful with these, like for example, these they get a little bit dry sometimes. I think there's a sense of it creating a longer line, and I think like in the first violin part, that's almost like Mendelssohnian scherzo moment, right? But in fact, it's not quite, because everything else is more connective. So it's actually both in the second violin and cello parts in 33, not too short on those notes. And there's some other examples of that sort of thing. What I would love to try is the big one, where I was first talking about the cello bass line, which is measure 47. And if you could start in measure 44, that would be really great. Great. So these things, that's great. Terrific. When you have this dum-pa-da, when you have that rhythm again, but with different slur pattern, for example, when you have I would say, it's kind of my take on this, and I think I'm tying us back to the beginning where I was feeling that sort of vocal connection, and less instrumental and rarely dry, right? So I think the dotted eighth notes I find are most successful when you really sing through them. You still have to articulate the 16th note, the short note, but I think it sometimes slips into where it gets a little bit swallowed up. And I think it's important to sing through the line most of the time. I think more often than not, you try to think of it more that way. Now, again, that plus the tempo being needing to be pretty sprightly, pretty quick, right? So I think you can explore that, as I was trying to show before with my bow, how to sculpt those notes and get the bow to get the notes, have the bow get the notes to speak in the slower tempo, and then when you speed it up, you hang on to some of that, so it doesn't slip into something that is that's missing some of the intensity of the music itself. So that was better, that bass line. But you did a great thing, because then when you went to the A sharp, I felt you sort of really sitting on the A sharp. It did have the impact of slowing things down in that moment, but I don't mind it as you explore the idea and discover it more fully. So a couple of we have to stop. This is the famous cello solo. Be careful, first of all, the high B. Sometimes vibrato gets a little hysterical on that high B. I say that from direct personal experience. So I'll never forget in a recording session, and the recording engineer said, can you make the vibrato on that B less hysterical? And I was like, not this piece, it was a different piece, but it was the same stupid note. Anyway, so I think a little leaner then. Oh, I see, this is a different edition. Just be even more important. The E before the B. Because the perfect fifth is an incredibly expressive interval, especially when it's falling. This one's going up. Just make sure you really give that proper attention. That's important. And that's okay. That's a little cello moment. And then I think in general, I mean, when you get to there are a couple magic moments of super quiet. For example, 137. Right, you have this piano and it comes down and it becomes really quiet, and then diminuendo. The problem with that place is he writes poco ritardando and then 4 measures and then a tempo. It can die a little bit too much, and I think that there's still, you have to pace yourself through that a little bit better. Keep there's energy in there. Like I said, there are very few places, if any, in this movement that completely relax after the opening, right? And so be very, very careful that doesn't die away completely. Yes, dynamically it has to be very quiet. Yes, it has to be very soft and subdued kind of color. And I do think you have to pace yourself through that. And then when our tempo comes, it's still quiet, but it has suddenly quite a lot more energy. So that's one place. And then I think there's one other place where he writes a ritardando or something, and maybe not. I thought there was one other place. But anyhow, be careful. Here's the place you have to be careful also. 210 roughly 209. There's so many bars of pay very close attention to the harmonic progression in I think there can be freedom, a little more freedom in that without slowing down the tempo. I think there's room for a little rhythmic wiggle. And then especially when you get to 219 in the second violin part, there has to be more motion and direction. But keep it going, in other words. But the interest is of course in the viola part. That viola line is particularly interesting. But the whole time that kind of brooding and continuous has to stay energized and excited. Yeah. It's really fabulous playing. There's so many doors we could open if we had 18 more hours. But in less than an hour, I feel like we've hit a few things. And I must now bid you farewell to move on to our Haydn group. Any quick thoughts or questions before we say goodbye for the moment?
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks so much.
You're extremely welcome. It's a great pleasure to hear you. Keep it up. Great work.
Thank you very much. It's
Welcome.
so exciting to hear string quartets.
Isn't it though? Isn't it?
It's really wonderful. And this Mendelssohn is just, I remember, it's a piece that my quartet played a lot. Yes. And I remember playing it and often having your heart race at the end of that movement. Yes. Because the energy is so just...
It doesn't let up, right? I mean, it's just like, once you start, you keep going. And I mean, of course, then if you play the whole piece, then you get a sense of balance. But just extracting that movement. It's like he uses up all the calm at the beginning, or is it really calm? and then the rest of the time, you're like, wah! Maybe I was like that when I was 18. Maybe I'm like that now. But,
Yeah, well... We're going to move on to Haydn, or move back to Haydn. And we have a group from the Royal Academy of Music. They're called the Ametza Quartet.
Fabulous.
And I met them because Laura, their second violinist, played in a Baroque edition of the really big class. So when she told me she had a string quartet as well, I thought, great, let's rope her into this. And I'm so excited that our friends at the Royal Academy have arranged for them to be in a recital space, and they've got a beautiful setup, and
great.
And they're wearing their masks. So well done, guys. Thank you for
being that's all we've been doing playing. We wear masks every single time. Hang on one split second. I want to make sure I pull the score up. I'm resorting to electronic means, and I want to make sure I have it on my iPad. But carry on. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
We're going to share their video first, so that'll give you a second as well. This is Haydn's Opus 20, number 5. in F minor. I thanked them because this is my favorite Opus 20 quartet. So thank you again
Yes.
for sharing my favorite.
Mine too.
And it's
And
a piece
I'm
that.
good. Yes,
You're
no,
good?
we're good. I'm all set.
Okay, good.
Now. Go ahead. Yes, sir.
This is a piece though that I've heard Chris play a whole lot of because Mark, our in-house engineer, engineered the St. Lawrence Quartet's Opus 20 album. So I'm very familiar with your recording of it and love it. And I've heard you play it live too. I think at Stanford. So here we go. This is the first movement of this Haydn.
Good. We're good. Perfect. Yay! Terrific, 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 terrific. I want to ask you a few quick questions. The most important and burning question is, where were you where you made that video? That's such a beautiful spot.
It's my parents' place. It's really nice. I've been really
I
lucky.
just was I took a peek at it last night. It was like, wow, that's so nice. I want to be there. Well, it's kind of nice here too, but still, that's remarkable. And right now you are at your school. Tell me where you are.
We're at the Royal Academy of Music in London.
So you're at school. Yeah. And what's going on school-wise there? Do you do in-person stuff these days, or is it all remote? What's happening?
We've mostly been back in person since September, like the beginning of the month. So
Yes,
yeah,
the
we're
beginning
quite
of the
lucky.
month. Yeah.
But things
Great,
are
and that's
getting
working.
better, so who knows how much longer.
It's so far so good. It's working out okay for people.
Yeah.
And of course you stay masked and yeah. Our school, Stanford, is completely online. Although my quartet's been getting together like you guys with masks on and measuring out the 2 meters and the whole deal. We're making a bunch of videos, and all of our videos we're wearing masks in all of our videos, and we'll see what the longevity of those videos might be once we get past this pandemic. But in any case, it's great to be back playing again. And you all have been together. I know Cecily said this at the beginning, but that was ages ago. So remind me again. You've been playing together for how long?
I think 1 year.
Okay, great.
Minus
And what?
6 months of lockdown.
Yeah.
Yes, right. And great. And have you done? So how much repertoire have you played together? Is this a relatively new piece, or is it something you've brought back?
I think this was actually the first quartet that we studied together. We decided
Fabulous.
Haydn.
It is such a standout work. I mean, Cecily mentioned it was her favorite of the Opus 20s, I think she said. And even though doesn't feature the cello as much as 20 number 2 or number 4, there's something so remarkable about this music itself. The key, for example, F minor, and the intensity of it, and the breadth and length. And have you ever played it doing both repeats? Have you played the second repeat as well?
No, never.
It's actually very effective. You should consider it at some point because, of course, first of all, he writes first and second endings, so you go back. But the effect of going through that material a second time can be quite emotionally, meaningful, I would say. So I have a couple of questions for you. I think about. My feeling of this music, and really this is a piece I have, obvious biases because, as Cecily mentioned, we recorded it, and Mark was producer engineer of our recording, and this was several years ago, so we played it about 80,000 times, and I never tire of the piece at all. And you develop these sort of ideas that are hard to separate yourself from at a certain point, although I try really hard. So a lot of things I will share are based on just all those experiences of having played it, but there are also stylistic considerations. I mean, if you are attempting or thinking in terms of, you want to try to get into somewhat the mindset of the kind of classical performing style, I mean, that is a really super cool thing to do. I don't know how effective my quartet is at that, or how hard we actually try. I think we tend more toward the overt, emotional, expressive way of playing, well, just about anything, but even Haydn, I should say, because of course this is the earliest music we have, Haydn quartets. So some of the things I might talk about are on the topic of being a little more extreme, or a little bit more direct and clear with the kinds of expression that you're creating. And then other things will just be, I just have a few questions for you right off the top. For example, well, this is not, well, anyway, I'll ask it. Do you have those new Simon Roland Jones, Peter Zurtext parts? Yeah, great. Which is all we play off of now because we like them so much. And we did a session with him recently. Do you know him, by the way?
Yes.
Yeah, he's terrific. We did a Zoom session with him recently. We talked about his process of creating these editions and this sort of thing, and how they're basically they're urtext and they're scholarly, but they're designed for performers. So there are a lot of interesting things that make them accessible, I think. So for starters, the very beginning, I was a little unsure what your idea was in terms of not to dwell on dynamics, because Haydn is a little spotty in his dynamic markings generally, unlike Beethoven, who came shortly after him, who filled his quartets and writing with dynamic markings. So the beginning, it's not uncommon to see the beginning of a Haydn quartet with no dynamic marking, and that's the case here too, because the forte is just bracketed, so there's an assumption that it would be forte. So what is your thought? I mean, do you want to try to play forte at the beginning? Are you not really quite trying to play forte or full, or what is your thinking?
We were trying to think more in terms of the character and the mood instead of the dynamic. So I don't think we really labelled the dynamic, but
yeah, I actually
quite tragic.
No, I actually love that mindset. In fact, my ideal world would be one in which we would all start our relationship with a piece with a part that has no dynamics at all, or even slurs for that matter. We'd start with just notes. We'd have to figure out what we would want to do without the composer's indications. And then afterward, we could see what the composer actually said. But I am with you 100%. For example, Bach, unaccompanied Bach, where there are no dynamic markings at all. I never impose actual dynamic markings on the phrases. I never say, well, this is piano and this is forte. I mean, I just like to think more and less and fuller and less full and that sort of thing. So I love that mindset. The only thing that I find tricky about what you did is it was in my opinion, slightly non-committal. I guess I wanted it to be a little more, a little fuller. Let's put it that way, in my own personal opinion. And one of the reasons for that is not just because it's the beginning. And in fact, when you repeat, you could do it differently. But it's because in the recapitulation, he does actually mark pianissimo, right? I mean, there's a dynamic that he actually indicated. So we know that the idea is that's supposed to be super quiet. And Haydn does that sort of thing a lot, where he flips the dynamic. He writes pianissimo and then he writes forte. Whereas at the beginning, he writes nothing and then he writes poco piano, which presumably is somewhat quiet, and then he finally writes a forte. So I would suggest a little bit more. We won't say forte, because I'm on the same page with you about that. But I do think it could have a little more, perhaps a bit more substantive, a little bit more of a clear start. Okay, so that's one thing. And then I think there's room for more shaping in terms of the actual lines themselves. So, and that would be even, particularly, let's say, starting in measure 5, and then there's always the question with Haydn, do we do subidos or do we not do subidos? Like, for example, that forte in measure 8, is it subito or do you grow into it? I think you can make a case for either. I don't think it's a given that it's subito. So were you thinking subito or not there? I know I just heard you play, but I don't even remember exactly what you did. Yeah, but that's it's okay if it is. I just want to be sure that before that, because it's poco piano, it still has enough musical shape and musical interest. So there's that. There's the musical shaping, the providing more clarity of some of your musical ideas, and then sometimes a bit more rhythmic flexibility. Like 17, I mean, I think there's a little, without, putting a fermata on downbeat of 19 or last beat of 18, I don't mean that. But I think there's there's a moment where we just kind of hang. And then I think, this big chordal rhythmic unison moment, right? And then GP rests, and then the descent, sort of falling feel. So following that shape of the line. And I think shapes of lines, the natural contour that you see on the page, we always have to be mindful of what's happening. And it's often the case, for example, look ahead 3 measures to 22 and 23, the descending bass line, da, 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 da. It goes down scale-wise, and even most of you, I think all of you actually are doing this descent. Da, 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 ba, da, 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 ba, da, 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 ba, da, 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 ba, da. I mean, it's just this falling thing, right? Are you thinking of that as having a dynamic impact as well? Yeah. So I think those. I think you're hinting at some of these things, and they don't necessarily come across enough for my ears. I would like to hear a little bit more clarity in some of these ideas. So let's try a few things. And let's do from the beginning. And again, what if the beginning were just, I don't, okay, I'll say assertive, just a little bit more, we're starting now, with a little bit more clarity. Good. I wonder something about, I'll try to do this without knocking my computer over. The bow speed, so are you thinking, sorry, I have the list of your names, I'm gonna get it. Madeleine?
Yep.
Is that correct? Madeleine?
No, what you said
Okay.
is fine.
Madeleine is good. Okay, good. Well, yeah, if it's Leine, then it's French, and then it's Madeleine. But you don't have the E, right? It's just okay, sorry. Anyway, I think about what we can do to create musical shape with bow speed a lot of the time. So if it's too much the same, I'm sensing that it's a little bit more the same than it ought to be. So what if it's, because when you guys come in, there's this sense of a lot of energy in those eighth notes, right? And the bow is really moving. Now, I don't think it has to be quite the same because you're doing different things, but if you're, it comes out lacking a little bit of shape. So I think, I would think of beginning of the note. Now, I exaggerate slightly, and you don't have to do too much of it. But I think if we tie it into the idea of singing a little bit more, or let's do this. This is even more fun. Madeleine, why don't you sing it for us once through your mask? How would you sing that opening phrase? Good. Oh, you sing very nicely. So I might, this is a matter of personal preference, of course, right? So I mean, again, and we have these kind of class meetings. I'll quickly share with you my perspective, and then you might feel differently, and that's totally cool. But I think my tendency would be perhaps a bit more release. But what I did notice, and of course you did take a breath in the second bar, and I don't know if that affected it, but that you didn't sustain them all the same. So and then even more interesting is where those intervals take us. Can you play Madeleine by yourself slowly once and just really think about how each of those intervals is connecting through the line? Cool. So that's great. So I like to think, one of the great advantages we have as string players over four pianists is that we can play things on different parts of the instrument, same pitches, right? Piano can only play a key in one spot, and that's that. So now, of course, I'm playing it on the cello, which is another experience altogether. But so because you don't have an open D flat string, you cross string for the D flat. But if you were to play it on one string, probably would be too slidey anyway. But you would feel the interval a bit more, as opposed to. It's easy when you cross, right? But when you have to do it on, there's probably no good violin fingering where you would do it on one string, is there? Or not even good. Is there a fingering where you would do dom pi autumn? Can you just try that? On the, you have to do it on the G string, right? Yeah? Yeah.
I'd need to.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Haydn meets Wieniawski. But in any case, I mean, not that you would play it that way. You know, I'm not advocating for that. But even when you cross, I think even if you, sorry, I screwed up. But feeling that connection of the interval. So to me, there are these two things: how you deal with the bow speed on the long note, then how you connect through those intervals, whatever that interval is, in the eighth notes and faster notes. And then you guys, you know, measure 4 is a big deal because that's finally you get to play the downbeat, right? Bum 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 dee da da. So I think sometimes the best way to register a lot of little things, and these are all very little things, is to play way under tempo. So yum chum 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 ta woo, and Madeleine, just you know, not to get let's stay stylistic, but feel the interval as well as you can. Don't even change your fingering. Just you know, really try to feel those things. Imagine what it felt like to sing the line when you sang it, and imitate that in your playing. And then the other three of you, you know, bar 2 is harmonically more intense than bar 1. Bar 3 is less harmonically intense, but probably slightly more harmonically intense than bar 1. So it's like least intense, most intense, a little less intense, and then downbeat, woo, which is kind of where you're going, bar 4. And then, you know, he gives you this poco piano after that, and he wants the whole thing to kind of wash out. So can you, so yeah, back, beginning, but under tempo once, and try to get all of those things. Cool. That's great. It could almost work that way. Maybe that's what he meant by moderato. No, just kidding. But you know, there's a weighted boom that now when you play faster, of course, you can't really keep. But I think, you know, noticing details, of course, is something that we're always trying to do in our practice, in our rehearsing, in our studying of any piece. I have to say what I find most compelling and fascinating about this opening, besides the fact that it's in F minor and that's really serious, is this, what I was just saying to Madeleine, these incredible intervals that make you feel like you're working with something, you know, like taffy or something, and you're pulling it, or maybe something that bounces, I don't know, some material that isn't just something you put on it's not an object. It's something that has malleability to it. And then, you know, when you get to bar 4, it's like the three of you go, whoa, no, we're going to give a sense of order now. And then the second phrase, the poco piano, is a variation on it, right? It's like an improvisation on it. You know, similar kind of mood, but it feels different because of the fast-moving notes, and then it goes somewhere else. So let's go back to the beginning one more time. Go back to tempo. Just play it again. See if you can, you know, feel a bit more of these little details coming through. Thank you. That's terrific. Oh, I liked it. I liked it a lot. I think there are a lot of possibilities there. And as you're working on the piece, ask yourself, is there room for a little bit of flexibility, a little bit of freedom, without throwing away your tempo? Obviously, tempo is important. Obviously, consistency of pulse is going to be important. We're not tossing it out the window at any point. But I do think there's like dom. There was something a little bit more elegant and sad about it this time, which I like. And then the eighth notes at the beginning too, I think had a little bit more of that. So I thought that was really terrific. Now this is a personal preference thing. When we get to measure 13, where we just stopped. There's something about going from, I think it's super cool that he didn't, let's do the rewrite. Oh, I love doing rewrites. Can you play measure 11? And then, sorry, I have here, Garwyn, is that how you say your name? Garwyn? Yes, yeah. Garwyn. When you get to measure 12, can you play eighth notes there? Instead of a whole note. So play right in measure 11, and the only rewrite is in the cello part, moving notes instead of sustained note. I mean, that's a perfectly reasonable solution to that place. I mean, he could have written that, right? I mean, I don't know the answer, but why do you suppose he didn't write that?
I think in bar 12, when the cello has a longer note, the tension and the harmony is much more apparent. Right.
So you feel that, you feel the tension and the harmony. And also, I think that's exactly right. And I also think it gives you an opportunity in measure 13 then to sort of, I think I'm gonna get this groove going again. But I don't think it has to snap. So what I love to do with that is 4, 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, boom, boom, boom. So dare I say, I start a little bit hesitantly almost, because it's like I myself am shocked by the fact that I'm holding that C in the previous bar. And that, now I'm going to go back to moving notes. And that's a general comment I want to make, because it comes up, as a cellist and noticing cello parts, in particular in classical repertoire, and there are a bunch of places, for example, measure 37, and then at the end of the exposition, measure 46, where you have these, bum, 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 bum. I'm a big fan of I don't want to say playing unevenly, but not letting it sort of slip into a predictable groove. So there's always there's always something interesting. And to me, in case we don't get to it, of all of them, the one at 76 is really interesting, because 3 of you are playing moving notes there, and I think there's opportunity there. We might skip to that in a second. The one in measure, the cello one, it's where he writes the piano a sigh and the coda, and that, by the way, that's another reason to do the second repeat, because look how big that coda is. It's a gigantic coda, right? I mean, from a composer who doesn't generally write codas at all to speak of. I mean, normally, you'd have a repeat and you would just repeat it and then end the same way. Here he writes a coda that's something like 20-some measures long. So, those eighth notes right there, where you have the piano a sigh, boom, 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 our favorite tritone. These moments where you can actually, I guess I would say one of my goals in playing this music from the cellist perspective is that every note is endlessly interesting in a way, but not so endlessly interesting that it sounds like I'm trying to steal the show, because no one should ever steal the show. But I think there's so much interest in some of these potentially mundane sounding passages. So in particular, I would say, focus on that kind of thing, in as much as there's so much else going on in this piece. So anyway, back to where we were. Let's keep going because I think we can cover a good chunk of this. If you don't mind starting in measure 11 one more time, and now, of course, as Haydn wrote it. Great. Thank you. You don't need that much time, but I like that you just let it sit. I think it's one of the things where the pulse is going on in the back of your head, but you don't want it. You want it to be exactly in time. So, yeah, bum 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 4-1. Bum 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 bum. So it's more or less in time, but there's a sense of it. You're sort of like, you just had a new idea. It's like your brain said, "Oh, what about this?" And then ba-da-dum, bum, 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 bum. One of those moments. But that was cool. That I liked a lot of things about that. I really did like those things. I have another sort of general question though. We see it in Mozart. We see it in a number of composers. And we see it in this edition of Haydn, not so much in other editions of Haydn. And that is the staccato marking versus the vertical slash, which some people call strokes marking. How do you read those? So, for example, in measure 18, bum, 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 you all have those more vertical kind of mark on the notes, right? So what does that mean to you?
Maybe that it's just not how it would normally be played. So in some way, I mean, it's totally dependent on the situation that you find it. Sometimes it can just mean really short, but I think it's somewhere like here, maybe it's more that they're even, or I don't know, something.
I think you're exactly right. I think it well, first of all, it draws attention to the notes. I think some people default to it meaning short, and I don't think it always means short. I think here it means separate. Sometimes Haydn in particular will write it like a group of notes where you might be inclined to add a slur, and he'll put those notes. Now here you wouldn't slur, obviously. And I don't think he would play wah, wah, wah either. But maybe if he put a staccato, you'd be inclined to play a little shorter. So I often feel it just means a kind of emphasis or a level of importance to the note. And there are tons of them. I mean, like, look at this sort of second theme area. So obviously, I'm talking about 28, obviously. 29, obviously, contrary motion slur is very legato. It's really cool, but da da bum bum. I mean, separation for sure. Now, I think it's up for discussion how short, right? For me, I think because you finally reached this forte, I shouldn't say finally, but you have reached this forte here. I wouldn't play too short. That's all I was going to say. But I just wondered what your, philosophically, what your approach was to that marking, because it's a frequently used one, and I think you're right that it doesn't always mean the same thing. Let's just do that one. Do you mind starting around 70? Dum dum bum bum 4 1 dum bum 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 bum. With this theme in 1 second. That was very good. I had a quick thought. Unfortunately, I can't hear you quite as well balanced and that sort of thing as in your recording, which is understandable because we're in real time now and we're on Zoom. But so I'm not getting the best balance. I'm not going to comment on that because I don't think that's a problem really. But one thing I would say, I was talking to the other group about this a lot, and I think actually, by and large, you're handling it well. But in general, when you have these rests, these group rests, bum, I talked about timing in the rest, but also that you really feel it, as a unified rhythmic gesture too. Bum bum and even though only Madeleine comes in after the rest, that you're really, the rest. I often say the rests are the hardest thing of all, because you need to find a way to convey a sense of music, either stopping or continuing through the rest. So just be very careful about that. I'll just leave you with that thought at the moment. And I also think, again, Madeleine, there's another moment of great opportunity. There's a little of that going on. And I think, in the practice room, you can really like, you have to slow it down and over romanticize it and all that sort of thing, just so you can really feel the intervals, and then take away the over romanticization of it and play it realistically in the end. But I think we just don't want to miss cool stuff. That is in the end, if I can leave you with one thought, don't miss cool stuff. And in this music, there's cool stuff all over the place. So just be very careful. And then Garwyn, I think this thing I always find, for some reason it's more often than not a little out of tune. So and I think it's because of the D flat going to the C. Can you just play that by yourself? Yeah, do it in tempo now.
Sorry?
Try it in tempo now. Sorry, try it in tempo. One more time. Yeah, that's better. Well, I have to say sometimes I actually break the slur on the second one, because I just have let's just say it depends on what my first violinist does. But sometimes we just play around with the slurs a little bit. That's just dependent upon your preferences. But I also think it's easy for that to sound rushed. So I think you can be the teeniest bit broader on that. It's your big solo. Actually, cellists don't get too many solos in this movement. So anyway, it is a solo technically. But let's keep going though, because I want to do the second theme now. We can even just go right from 25. Is that okay? Great. You all went the same way. I thought you were going to repeat or go on. In any case, good. So, I'll say a couple of things. Again, we get a little compromise with internet connection and that sort of thing. But just da dum bum ba da bum bum bum. At least right now, it sounds like you're not quite together on those notes. So make sure you're very. It's this sort of thing. It's like you're pulling da da bum bum, and then you release on the two second notes. So da da dum bum ba da dum bum ba dum bum, and just be sure you're using the bows precisely the same way, so that that's really a unified gesture. Da da dum bum ba da dum, and then wa da 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 bum bum. And then now we have the aforementioned rest situation. Da da dum bum bum. Boom. And he really, even in his most serious writing, which this piece, it falls into that category. There's still a little humor in there some of the time. So da da dum bum bum, and then doo da dum bum bum, and then what, and then whoa. and then he writes this legato between the first violin and the cello, which is so cool. Can you play just first violin cello 35? Right. I always think that's so interesting because the first measure da wa da da, you go contrary motion, play the moving notes together, and the second measure it's because he tosses it more or less over to the second violin part, but it's not the same pitches. It's really interesting how he decides to swap those parts around. But the fact is, it's very legato, right? It's completely connected. Can I just hear the second violin and viola in 35 now? Right. So you have to play a couple of different roles because you have to provide that da da bum bum, and then everybody legato woo do do wee wee woo, and to juxtapose those two articulation, features is what makes that passage particularly interesting because it's as if he's saying he's going toward legato, but he's remembering what you just played, da, da, ba, ba, ba. And in fact, the whole second theme area really is juxtaposing a legato kind of writing with short writing, da, 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 bum, bum, ba, da, bum, bum, po, da, 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 da. That's a serious feature of it. He basically stacks them here. Can we just do that one more time? Da-dum, bottom, bum, bum. Maybe that's 31, I think. Sorry, half of 30. Is that okay? To start right in the middle of measure 30?
Yep.
Then breathe. Good. Good. Great. That's great. We can keep going. That's terrific. And I think I just want to mention that. Okay, Sorry, I like to say people's names. Laura, second violinist. Got that right.
Yeah.
That's an easy one. But I mean, right now is sounding great. There were times when I thought you had that kind of thing, like maybe even in measure 37. Never be afraid to bring it out. I often say to string quartets that the second violin part is a part that can get subdued a little bit too easily, especially in this, either this seating position or even if the viola and cello are swapped. Either way, the first violinist is always more to the fore. So when you have parts like that, just not to overplay, but just make sure that they have enough presence. At least now with your setup, I'm getting enough, so that's terrific. Then just going ahead, you know this already, but I just want to point out what's super cool about it. That and this is another Haydn thing, and sometimes he does it to create something more or less humorous. I don't think that's what he's doing here, but the fact that it's 4 bars and then 3 bars and then 2 bars. Now I don't know if there's anything in particular you need to do. So it's now and then he changes it. So he's reducing the length of the phrase. But I'm sure you know that and you've heard that and you're considering it. But just to do what you can to show some of those interesting little twists and turns, I think is really important. Can we just now go from the double bar and play for a little bit? Cool. Great, 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 great. Thank you. Terrific. Again, I lose a little of the detail because of the the internet sort of thing. I guess not sort of thing, the internet thing. But a couple of thoughts. So when of course the power of harmony and harmonic progression, and also the point that I mentioned earlier, like when you start in the development, this bass line, so it's deep, D flat C, then and when you finally settle on A flat major, which is a very sensible place to fall because it's the relative major of F minor, there's probably a sense of having arrived somewhere. And I think what I want to stress is that you want to be sure you feel like you've really arrived when you get to measure 56. Oh, finally, A flat. This is what we've been searching for. But I think so if you're looking at that group of, it's actually 9 measures, right? 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It's a 9 measure section before the character shifts a little bit. Where is it most intense? Where is it least intense? I mean, where do you feel the sound? And I think what I'm talking about is harmony more than anything else. Like when you start, you're in D flat major, right? Which is major key, not particularly troubled sounding, right? So how do you look at that in terms of where you're feeling the most tension and the least tension?
Probably the most tension in 52.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. That bar, and also, and I agree, and also then you're in a pretty somewhat troubled place because you're in E flat minor after that, which is like, what? E flat minor, where'd that come from? Does it even exist as the key? Well, it does. But the point is, why do you feel 52 is intense? What is it that makes it feel intense to you?
Just very close harmony and distance.
Mm-hmm. And I think there's one other thing. I mean, it's I think there's back to the very first point I made today, pretty much the first point. That idea of intervals. Where you reach up to that C flat. I think that is really meaningful. And then the group comes together again on the next phrase. The 3-bar group. And then I think, I would encourage you to feel what I was mentioning before, that when you arrive at 56, A flat major, thank you for A flat major, that you're really happy with that. Then I have a question for you. So let's say we're starting from 56 and getting all the way to 76. So we've got 20 measures here, where he does mark a very decisive dynamic. Pianissimo for 3 of you, sotto voce for the first violin. What is your scheme, in terms of sound, dynamic, that sort of thing? You don't even have to say forte piano. Where's less, where's more? What are you thinking?
You mean going from between 56 and 76?
Yeah, let's say 56 is it's not particularly bright, or he gives you the forte at the development, right, in 49. Doesn't say anything dynamically for a long time. Finally, he gives you. Actually, he doesn't say anything. Right? There's not another dynamic until 76, right? So that's the actual piano forte dynamic kind of thing. But what about how do you determine what kind of shape to give it comparatively, and where are your high points, where are your low points?
So it grows in steps with the first violin and second violin.
Right.
Sections, and then 69 is kind of a sudden change of color, and it becomes much.
Right. So what is your thought about 69 is a significant arrival moment, because there's where he he brings this back, right, and it's a parallel to measure 35. So it's development, so anything goes, but it's I always feel there's quite a bit of, personally, I feel there's quite a bit of tension at that point, because of that, and also because of what I think you were saying that is key, and that is and then and it goes up a step, and then he goes up another step. So you start on C in measure 58, you start on D in measure 63, and then 66 you start on E. So they're going up, and then the line sort of swoops down. But what happens is contrary motion, you meet in 69, and I think that place has to, whether it's loud or soft, I just think it's important that you feel the tension of that measure. And then again, he does that thing with the not eighth notes in the cello part, and then boom, 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 and then puts them back in at measure 71. Because those two bars, I don't think they stop. But if you look at the cello part in 67, boom, 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 with the ongoing moving notes, and then that legato thing that we talked about before, and then the sostenuto quality of 70 in the cello part, and then boom, 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 and then the eighth notes continue, and then they keep going for a long time. So I guess, I don't get a full sense of the detail of what you're doing in terms of your shape listening right now, but I just want to make sure I share that mindset with you, or at least have that discussion with you, because I think it's important to have a kind of overall shape through the development so that it holds together well. And then very clearly you have this sotto voce, which is and pianissimo, which is such a reserved moment. Let's just go from there. I won't have you play all that again. We don't have much time. But I just want to get into the recap. Because I think by the time he writes this quartet, the idea of the sonata form is pretty clear. I mean, some of his sonata forms are not really fully formed sonata forms. And often he writes monothematic sonata allegro form, where he doesn't write a second theme. This kind of has a second theme. The development is huge here. I mean, it's a really big deal. So let's just go from, can we just go from 73? That's great. That's terrific. That's perfect. And then obviously this statement of the theme is very dynamically subdued, sound-wise. It's held back, but it's really interesting how the first time he writes. Bear with me 1 second. I'm just going to state it. Measure 18. And then here, right before the recap, he writes. And that's significant, where you all come in on the downbeat in measure 84, then and then so it's a kind of expanded version of that earlier idea. So to really understand, how they pair to each other, just so in the same way you understand, when you have a theme that happens more than once, how does it differ from one time to the next? That's terrific. And one maybe just sort of a couple of closing ideas. These bars, 98 and 99, are so cool harmonically. And that cello part, once again, pardon me for focusing on the cello part. I'm trying not to do it extensively, but I actually do a weird fingering there, just because you don't have to do the fingering, obviously, but for the very reason that I was talking to Madeleine at the beginning about feeling intervals. And it only works if you can do it without obviously sliding, because we certainly don't want to hear. That would be kind of tasteless. But if you can do it, moving your left hand very quickly and keeping the color similar. In any case, if you cross, just feel. It's kind of the only place where the cello gets to do that kind of thing. So I think it's important to make sure that is you give that a little more attention. And then the next few bars are just the way he writes all those little suspensions, those little sort of harmonic dissonances or dissonances that get resolved. We don't really get the sense of resolution until 100 and 3. So just really feeling the harmonic tension through those bars. I think I'm not saying it takes extra time, but I think I would encourage you to give that a little more attention. That's all. Because I think those bars are particularly interesting. Now we're really out of time. Also keep in mind that this second thematic area, just like in Mozart K421, Mozart does the same thing. The second theme the first time is in major key. The second theme this time obviously is in the tonic key, which makes it in minor, right? Which is not such a groundbreaking idea, but the emotion of it is so much more intense than A flat major, right? Which has a sense of not relaxation, but openness and freedom and clarity. The minor is much more intense. So just be sure that you're really feeling the difference of the minor compared to the major when you have the same material. And really that applies to a lot of things in the recap where he stays in the tonic key, right? As opposed to when he goes into relative major in the first half. Okay, that's cool. And then I think there's this thing in 137. The last thing I will say is right after that second ending, where he's kind of combining ideas. In particular, in 148, he combined he takes parts of two different things and puts them together. So I think you can feel 137, I think, should be not slow, but just very controlled in terms of time. Then he writes his piano a psi thing, which is a really interesting marking for the. It's a coloristic marking for sure. And then when you finally get to the I think that can be a bit more dramatic. And then I think the last statement back to those those vertical lines on those eighth notes. I would say not in the viola and cello part, not too short on those separate, but I think there's a lot of heaviness, weight to it. If you look back at some of the crappy old editions of this piece, they're actually, in some of them there's a diminuendo there, and then a subito, diminuendo all the way to the pianissimo at the end, instead of subito pianissimo. And thanks to Simon Rowland-Jones in this edition, we now know that that's not what Haydn meant. So really, find yourself absorbed in the intensity of that fortissimo and the strength of that line at the end. And let yourselves, if you're not really feeling angry, pretend that you are, because I think there's some anger in this music, and I think you don't always have to be nice. I mean, yeah, you should always be nice, nice, but I think there's a lot of anger and frustration in the music, and I think sometimes there are times when I lose the full effect of that from you guys, and I think you can go farther with many different things we've talked about here. But otherwise, really terrific. I'm so excited to have heard you play. It was such an honor and a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I'm sorry to say we're out of time, but
I know I've gone over. I'm always running over. I'm sorry about that.
No, don't be. I think it's great. And Ametza Quartet, thank you so much for
Yes.
being our subjects today. I hope you learned and got a lot. I will just put in a little plug for these guys. They have a couple of live streamed concerts coming up. I think they're on, Laura, is it the 30th and the 1st? Is that correct?
Yeah, the first we're here playing this Britain 3, so.
Fabulous.
So, and I will post a little link for anyone any new fans you may have who would like to hear you play a concert.
Please do. I'd love to hear you guys play some more. That'd be fun.
Just a few things to wrap up, and then we'll all go on our various ways in our different cities and time zones and places. I'm so happy to be back with the really big class. I needed a little break, but here we are. And just to let you know what the plans are going forward, I will be doing, as long as we can find groups playing in a room together, chamber music masterclass once a month. And then alternate that with a violin class on the sort of every 2 weeks or fortnightly, as they say here, schedule. So rather than every week, will be every other week. The next class will be October 8th. It's a violin class, and our guest teacher is Kurt Nikkonen. So I will post about Kurt soon. One of my favorite violinists, and I can't wait to hear what he has to say. Chamber music classes, I needed to see how tonight went, so before I dared to set up more, and I think it was a great success. I hope everyone enjoyed it. It was so great to hear and sort of be immersed back in the details of playing string quartets. And Chris, I think my favorite thing that you said was don't miss the cool stuff. Just don't forget about all that cool stuff.
About the cool stuff.
In all music, but in string quartets in particular, we can just peel back layer after layer after layer of cool stuff and never run out.
Right. Exactly.
So I hope we all get to be doing that more again soon.
Yes.
As always, I'm very grateful for any donations that come the way of the big class. Donations to date have funded 18 teachers, over 65, well, now I have to add in tonight, so closer to 75 participants. And I've even been able to pick up a few pieces of gear that help the class run much more smoothly. We'll be loaning things out as people need them. And tonight we had a great amount of assistance from the Royal Academy of Music and from David Gleason. So thank you to them for helping us. The guys in South Africa did it all themselves, so well done, you guys. And does anyone have any questions before we log off? You can go to gallery view maybe, and if anyone wants to, we have a small group tonight. I have to get people back into the habit of coming to us for Thursdays. But I'm sure on YouTube we'll have a lot to catch up with. So, thank you. Bravo.
Thank